Hello, I'm Stormy 2007, the head training director at Lufthansa PTFS, and today I'll be giving you guys a basic overview of the captain training manual and how we train our captains. So for each training we have objectives, and in this case there are 12. In order for the pilot to pass the training, they need to do all these objectives and do all of them correctly. Each objective will affect their final score. So for each training, we will test the pilot's flying skills and ATC communication skills. In this case, the trainee is the pilot and the trainer is the ATC. For ATC, we utilize IFR and vectors. For those who don't know what vectors are, they are basically head 360, continue your climb to flight level 045. Vectors are used to guide pilots out of takeoff and landing. So our trainees have the option to do ATC communication during or after the flight test, and if they want to do it during VC, or if they want to do it via VC or Discord DMs. In the case that they want to do it after the flight test, they'll have to fly out and back into Perth, because for each training we have the pilots fly from Greater Rockford to Perth at a cruising altitude of 045. Although if they want to do ATC during the flight test, then they'll just follow this, Greater Rockford to Perth. Trainers will follow similar steps, ATC training manual. So if you are a trainer, please check that out. Anyways, here are the objectives. They cover parking, pushback, taxi, hold short, line up and wait, takeoff, cruise, descent, land, end taxi, and end parking throughout the flight, flaps, and ATC communication. Going on to our first objective, can the pilot properly park the plane at the gate? So at each gate there are signs. So let's say we had a 747, so they would have to put their front gear on this sign for their door to properly align with the gate. Once they do so, they will need to file a flight plan, and that flight plan is just a basic overview of their flight. Trainers will give the trainee the format for the flight plan, and we use the same format as ATC 24. Once the trainee does file a flight plan, they will need to request IFR, and request IFR is basically a basic overview of your flight. And when you do so, ATC will give you GPS direct, the runway you're departing from, and your squawk code. So on the second objective, can the pilot properly push back and follow marshal instructions? Once the pilot requests pushback, they're expected to specify their gate during their request, and once ATC gives them the sign to do so, there will be a marshal now, because PTFS doesn't have a pushback tug as of August 9th, 2022. PTFS does not have a pushback tug, so we have to utilize marshals. The trainee is expected to follow the marshal at all times, and we expect a quick response time. And ATC will also give the pilot where they will be pushing back to, although when there is a marshal, that will be unnecessary. So objective 3, or wait, one more thing. Now, the ATC still gives them where they're pushing back from, either way. Although when you have a marshal, that intelligence for the pilot will not be needed. Objective 3, can the pilot properly stay on line during taxi and know where to go? So the trainee will have to request taxi, and the ATC will give them basically taxiway signs that they need to follow in order to get to their runway. The pilot's expected to follow these taxiway signs and properly taxi to the runway and on the line too. If they're a little bit off, like this plane, that's okay. But if they're extremely off, then that is not okay. And so when the trainee arrives at the runway, they're expected to line up. They're expected to hold short. We'll get to that more later. So can the pilot properly hold short? So this is what I talked about a bit ago. So the pilot is expected to put their nose before this line right here. The purpose of holding short is to, request takeoff and to make sure there are no incoming traffic, or, if anyone's taking off at the moment. And so for holding short, they won't need ATC clearance, although ATC will give them their hold short point. In this case, it is B1, the sign with yellow letters. Can the pilot properly line up and wait for takeoff? Now, generally, this is not needed, although if a plane has just taken off, they will need to line up and wait. Or if a plane is coming in at another runway and possible intersection, then they will need to be expected to line up and wait. ATC will let them know if they need to line up and wait or not, and in the case that they don't need to, then they'll be given immediate takeoff. In the case that the trainee does have to line up and wait, they will be putting their back gears on this threshold right here, or at least on these signs. So normally a trainee would request line up and wait, although in the case that is unnecessary, then ATC will give them immediate takeoff clearance. Before, I forgot to mention with this hold short, they should set their flaps, although they can do that before taxi too. And they can do that during line up and wait, just before, it matters before they do their takeoff. Now, for takeoff, takeoff is really crucial. It is important to take every precaution to make sure you have a safe takeoff. Pilots should have a good vertical speed, like this plane in the image. Now, we cannot have a vertical speed that is steep like this, because that is not very good, nor a flat vertical speed, because then altitude will be a bit of a struggle. When the pilot reaches around 250 feet, it may vary per pilot, although before 1,000 feet is all good. They should retract their gears. Well, before 500 feet, they should retract their gears. And then once they get around 1,000 feet, they can go ahead and retract their flaps. Although before they do take off, they do require takeoff clearance from the ATC. So now we're on to cruise. Normally in our trainings, we have pilots cruise over St. Bartholomew at 4,500 feet, aka flight level 045. Trainees should have the departure airport out of render distance, and in the case that it is impossible, then it's no big deal. But in order to cruise, they should level off completely first, and then they should freeze. And that's how you cruise in ATC. Now let's go to descent. Now, first of all, the pilot, once cabin crew is all done, they can start making their descent towards in this case Perth, and then when they get close to the island, they need to request descent. So when the pilot starts descending, they should set their flaps to 1. Now, some planes are different. Some planes have up to 4 flap settings or up to 3 flap settings, but for most planes that we use, they have up to 2 flap settings. So, for either flap setting max, once they begin their descent, they should set their flaps to 1. Once they get close to the island, they should request approach, and they should specify which runway they want. In the case that they don't know, though, the ATC should give them their runway. But in trainings, it's always runway 29er. Now, we need to make sure that the trainee does not put the nose down too much. A little is fine. So again, request approach to runway, and then during this, and I forgot to mention this for takeoff too, they will be given vectors to come into the island. Now for Perth, we have initial approach. At Lufthansa, we define initial approach when they go over Giant Lukla Mountain. I think it is, in Perth, and that's when they enter initial approach. That's when they should set their flaps to max and bring their gear down. And that applies to every other airport too, although initial approach is different for every airport. It's just when you get aligned with the runway and you're coming in. Anyways, once they get close enough to the runway, once they're 100% aligned, after vectors, they'll be given ILS clearance. That means no vectors. You're all good to go. And yeah, that's approach. Now at landing. So we need to make sure that the trainee landed at the touchdown zone. So let me show you that on the runway. So this is the touchdown zone. It's these checkered lines, not this, but these checkered lines, and these two squares right here. We need to make sure the back gears at least touch down before this. In the case that they do not, the pilot should go around in order to prevent overrunning, which is very, very bad. Anyways, we need to make sure that they land smoothly too, and once they land, the ATC will greet them and tell them which direction to vacate. So for example, Lufthansa 9689, welcome to Perth, vacate left. And that way they'll exit the runway and then they'll stop for their taxi clearance. Now this is the same as taxiing. It's taxi to your aligned, or taxi to your assigned gate. Make sure to stay on that line too. And then generally, and then marshals will be there to greet the plane, and they should tell the plane when to stop. And shut off their engines too. And then, yeah. And then throughout the flight, did the pilot set flaps correctly? So for takeoff, they should have set flaps at 1 out of 2. In the case that there are 4 flap settings, they should have set it to 2 out of 4. And then throughout the flight, did the pilot correctly communicate with ATC? So, it's just kind of that. And then when I forgot to mention, but when the pilot lands, they're expected to retract their flaps. And then, so this is kind of like an overview of the flight type objective. So throughout the flight, did they properly communicate with ATC? Did they acknowledge all of ATC's calls and all that other stuff? And then did they properly set flaps? And yeah, this is a little final note. Make sure to tell them that if they have FO, the FO handles checklists. So this is kind of an end note to the trainee, that the the first officer will handle various stuff in the flight, like ATC communication, flaps gear, and all of that other stuff, and ground crew communication. So yeah, thank you for joining me in this video, and yeah, we're excited to have any further junior pilots to train, and yeah, have a great day.